In less than a second, something impossible happened. A silent anomaly pulsed through NASA's Space Weather Division, so brief it almost didn't exist. But the systems caught it, and every alarm on the floor lit up red. March 4th, 2022, 2:14 a.m. Goddard Space Flight Center, Maryland. A control room built to feel calm and predictable suddenly shifted into acute tension. Cold fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Rows of monitors glowed pale blue against the darkness. And a lone night shift engineer, half awake, coffee still warm, froze as a line of data slipped across his screen. A data signature he had never seen before. For 0.47 seconds, one of NASA's internal gateways registered an unauthorized signal, not a hack, not a malfunction, just something that should not have been able to reach it. 13 seconds later, NOAA's weather satellite network entered safe mode, shutting down automated pathways that protect U.S. forecasting systems. 6 downstream data stations were forced to reset. And in a place where timing is everything, those 13 seconds felt like a lifetime. 21 specialists were pulled from sleep and redirected to a crisis briefing. 8 hours of system rebooting. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in losses, calculated not in broken hardware, but in stalled predictions and missing atmospheric data that airlines and emergency services depended on. Procedure required the next step. A security alert was escalated to the FBI's cyber division, and the Department of Homeland Security quietly requested a trace of the signal's origin. Even at this stage, no one used the word breach. But everyone in that room understood what it meant when a protected satellite shuts itself down without warning. A system built to withstand solar storms, foreign interference, and cosmic radiation had just flinched. And the deeper investigators looked, the more the numbers refused to make sense. But what investigators discovered shouldn't have been possible. He came from a place most people drive past without slowing down. A small Midwest town, one grocery store, one gas station, winters that cut straight through the walls. His mother worked 2 jobs, often leaving before sunrise and returning long after the streetlights turned on. People in town said the same line about him for years. Smart kid, but kids like him don't go far from here. Inside a cramped living room, lit by a single lamp with a shaky fluorescent bulb, he built his first computer from discarded parts. Old boards, bent metal, a fan that screamed every time it started. He was 9.
That's not what we're
While
looking
other kids
for.
played ball in the driveway, he sat cross-legged on the floor, solving logic puzzles he printed from school computers. Teachers said he asked too many questions. They meant it as a warning, not a compliment. By 13, he was reading open-source satellite documentation, pages written for engineers twice his age. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough to stay curious. At 15, he wrote small simulations that mimicked weather patterns across the Great Plains, simple models running on a machine that took 2 minutes to render a single frame. At 17, he earned a scholarship to a state university, a big one, and just as quickly, he walked away. The reality was harsher than the brochure. Tuition gaps, dorm fees, textbooks that cost more than the family's weekly groceries. He tried to keep up, but the noise of campus life made him feel like he was underwater. He once told a friend, in a quiet tone that didn't match his age, "I learn faster alone," and he meant it. He left school before the first semester ended. Back home, he slipped into the digital corners where his mind had always lived. Forums about orbital paths, amateur weather tracking, small communities that monitored satellite passes at 400 miles above Earth. Not dark spaces, not criminal ones, just groups of people fascinated by the machinery in the sky. That's where he noticed it. Tiny technical doors left half open, public logs that weren't supposed to stay public, timestamps that drifted out of sync when they shouldn't. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, but to someone like him, patterns like these were invitations to look closer. He didn't want money. He didn't want power. He only wanted to understand the systems behind the clouds he watched since childhood. And slowly, without realizing it, a harmless curiosity began to take a different shape. That curiosity slowly became an obsession. NASA's satellite network wasn't designed to fail. It was designed to endure storms, radiation, and the constant noise of space. More than 20 operational satellites moved in coordinated orbits, each transmitting raw atmospheric data back to Earth. 7,000 relay points spread across continents, ships, and remote weather towers fed that information into 217 control gateways. A system so large it felt less like a machine and more like a living organism. Inside NASA's command centers, the lighting was always cold, a steady white glow that erased shadows and forced focus. Every log, every sensor, every anomaly passed through layers of verification before touching the core network. Multi-factor access, segmented privileges, continuous monitoring. Protocols designed to make sure no single person, no single mistake could compromise the chain. And yet, the importance of what these satellites carried made the system feel fragile in its own way. Temperature gradients over the Pacific, storm rotation signatures forming off the Gulf Coast, jet stream shifts above 30,000 feet that airlines relied on to adjust flight paths, data that helped emergency teams anticipate tornado outbreaks across Oklahoma, information that, in quiet ways, helped guard national security. Every reading meant something in the real world. But no system stays pristine forever. Buried beneath the modern hardware were older components, 12, sometimes 18 years old. Equipment that had survived budget cycles and outlived entire software teams. Then there was a gateway spun up for an internal project. Temporary, not part of the standard map. It was supposed to be disabled after the trial ended, but it wasn't. It stayed online, quiet and unmonitored, like a forgotten door at the end of a long hallway. And late at night, when staffing was thinnest, one engineer on the overnight shift carried responsibilities meant for 3 people. Monitoring sensors, managing weather streams, watching for solar activity, all while the world slept. Pressure like that doesn't break systems, but it weakens the edges around them. From the outside, NASA's network looked perfect, flawless, untouchable. It looked unbreakable. But every fortress has a crack. He developed a habit most people would find strange. Late at night, in a dim room lit only by a cheap LED strip, he scrolled through public satellite metadata the way others scroll social media. Numbers, timestamps, orbital drift ratings. He read them with the focus of someone studying a foreign language. Sleep came second. Understanding came first. On a small notepad, creased, coffee-stained, he documented every subtle shift he noticed inside NASA's public-facing systems. Not passwords, not restricted files, just metadata. Tiny updates in transmission delays, variations in packet size. To him, these weren't glitches. They were signals from a machine that never truly rested. The first anomaly appeared in late October 2021. A gateway that normally responded within 42 milliseconds suddenly took longer, just a fraction, but enough for him to feel it. He timed it again. And again. The delay wasn't random. Something was slowing down a process built to be consistent. A week later, a NASA weather visualization tool displayed a timestamp that drifted by 0.02 seconds. Most users wouldn't have noticed. Most engineers would have shrugged it off as minor latency. But he paused. For a system that processes atmospheric data at nearly 60 frames per minute, even a small drift mattered. That was when the obsession deepened. He started tracking the patterns the way a cardiologist monitors a heartbeat, watching for irregular rhythm, for anything that broke the pulse. He didn't know the gateway he monitored was tied to an internal NASA project. He didn't know it wasn't meant for public eyes at all. He only knew the pattern was off, and he wanted to know why. His preparation wasn't the kind found in crime thrillers. No break-in tools, no malware, no attempt to cross into restricted territory. Just a tiny script he wrote, barely 20 lines, to measure response times across open endpoints. A harmless tool, built not to penetrate, but to observe. Curiosity disguised as code. Still, curiosity has weight, especially when carried alone. He spent night after night at his desk, a small fan buzzing beside him, the room growing colder as winter settled over the Midwest. He didn't talk much, didn't go out. His mother thought he was studying for something important. In a way, he was. The truth is simpler than the legend that grew later. He wasn't chasing power. He wasn't seeking access. He was trying to answer a single question that wouldn't leave his head. How can a system this big make mistakes this small? And as the months passed, those mistakes lined up, one after another, forming a pattern he couldn't ignore. 6 months of notebooks, 6 months of logging drift, 6 months of timing every irregular beat of a machine orbiting hundreds of miles above Earth. Until one night, everything shifted into place. And after 6 months, everything aligned. He didn't plan for anything to happen that night. It was supposed to be another quiet session at his desk, an old monitor, a cold cup of coffee, and a script that had never done anything more dramatic than print numbers on a screen. 1:58 a.m., February 12, 2022. A silent Midwest apartment. The only light came from his monitor, washed out blue, flickering at the edges. He ran the same latency script he'd tested 100 times before, checking 3 public gateways that handled routine weather data. Simple, predictable, the digital equivalent of tapping a microphone to see if it still works. But at 2:11 a.m., the rhythm changed. A NASA relay, one normally precise to the millisecond, responded 2% slower than usual. Just enough to raise an eyebrow, not enough to raise suspicion. He leaned closer, watching the graph dip in real time, each bar dropping only a hair lower than the last. To someone else, the difference meant nothing. To him, it was a whisper from a machine that wasn't supposed to whisper. Then came 2 hours, 14 minutes and 32 seconds a.m. The moment investigators later described as an impossibility. His screen flashed. A gateway, one he never queried, sent a return signal. Not a warning, not a denial, a return. Something that should never happen without a request. The metadata didn't match the expected format. Timestamps drifted. Packet size didn't align. A value in the header flickered between 2 states, as if it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. And 800 miles away, at Goddard Space Flight Center, the same anomaly triggered an alert. To NASA, it looked like an unauthorized handshake, lasting 0.47 seconds. Less than the blink of an eye, yet enough for every system to freeze in place. Inside the control room, cold fluorescent lights reflected off a wall of monitors as a night shift engineer hit the emergency key. NOAA's weather satellite immediately shifted into safe mode. 13 seconds of suspended data. 13 seconds where no one knew if the system was under attack or simply confused. A red banner appeared across the internal dashboard. A report auto-generated. And within minutes, it was escalated to division leads. Procedure demanded it. Any anomaly touching a gateway, no matter how brief, had to be documented, analyzed, archived, and reviewed. Back in the dark apartment, he stared at his screen, heart pounding, breath shallow. He didn't understand what he was looking at. He hadn't requested access.
Terminate.
He hadn't touched anything beyond public endpoints. So why was a protected gateway talking back? Panic hit him with the speed of the signal itself. He shut the script, closed every window, pulled the Ethernet cable like it was burning his hand. The room went silent except for the fan humming in the corner. He stayed frozen in his chair, watching the cursor blink on an empty screen. In that moment, he didn't feel like a prodigy or a researcher. He felt like someone standing in the wrong doorway at the wrong time, accidentally witnessing something he was never meant to see. What happened next would take investigators months to unravel, and even then, they wouldn't agree on the explanation. And then, the unexpected happened. The investigation started before dawn, cold hallways, documents still warm from the printer, and a silence that told everyone this wasn't routine. The FBI's cyber division traced the anomaly to a cluster of residential IPs in the Midwest. Not a precise location, just a region. A digital shadow that matched the same area where he lived. It was enough to justify a deeper look. But the first contradiction surfaced almost immediately. System logs showed the anomaly occurred at 2 hours, 14 minutes, and 32 seconds a.m. His home router, however, recorded no activity at that exact second. No upload, no request. Not even a background sync. The device was offline, silent, as if holding its breath. Investigators dug into the behavior pattern behind the 0.47-second signal. It didn't resemble anything he had ever done. It wasn't hesitant or exploratory like his tests. It was fast, precise, surgically timed. A signature that felt like the work of someone, or something, used to navigating highly structured systems. One analyst described it as too clean to be curiosity. Another noted that the timing aligned with how automated systems probe faults, not how humans behave at a keyboard. Then came the second mismatch.
Initiating probe
A
sequence.
specialist analyzing device fingerprints found a near-perfect match to the
Confirming
machine
clean
he
pattern.
owned, an echo of its configuration. Same chipset family, same driver sequence, same clock drift. Almost identical. Almost. Because the geolocation didn't match. The fingerprint originated from a point nearly 600 kilometers away, in a different state entirely. Too far to be a coincidence, too far to blame on unstable routing. It was as if someone had cloned the characteristics of his device, but launched the signal from a place he had never been. Inside NASA, theories multiplied. Some believed someone used his digital identity as cover, an impersonation built from fragments of public data. Others suspected an internal auditor running undocumented tests, a scenario that had happened in large agencies before. A few whispered about system automation misfiring, an AI anomaly, a runaway diagnostic tool chasing its own tail. And there were those who wondered if this was nothing more than a chain reaction of tiny errors lining up at the wrong moment, a domino effect that looked intentional only because humans expect intention. But no theory fit cleanly. Every explanation left one detail unexplained, one gap in the timeline, one flaw in the logic. All he knew was this: the signal wasn't his, and yet somehow, every trail seemed to circle back toward him. Against the weight of suspicion, against the noise of half-formed conclusions and digital ghosts, he remained untouched by formal charges. The evidence pulled toward him, then slipped away just as fast. Somehow, he survived the moment. The interview room was small, a metal table, 2 chairs, and the low hum of a ventilation unit that never turned off. He sat there for 7 hours while FBI agents moved through a script of questions, slow, methodical, designed to press on any crack in his story.
We've already given you everything.
They asked about his computer, his habits,
Not
his
everything.
late-night logs, every detail of his routine. But the investigation hit the same wall again and again. Nothing tied him to the anomaly. No unauthorized access. No deleted files. No trace of intent. Just curiosity. And a coincidence no one could fully explain. By the end of the day, there was no evidence to hold him. And yet, no one could clear him either. He walked out of the building as a free man, but not as an innocent one. Not in the eyes of the agencies watching him. Inside NASA, the final summary landed on a single line: Anomaly cannot be reproduced. A 73-page internal report circled between departments, filled with charts, timestamps, and network diagrams, none of which answered the one question everyone had: what actually happened at 2 hours, 14 minutes, and 32 seconds a.m.? Outside the walls of the investigation, the story took on a life of its own. News outlets ran headlines that blurred fact and speculation. The 19-year-old who nearly breached NASA. The kind of title that sticks, even when the truth doesn't. Social media divided instantly, some calling him a prodigy who stumbled into a government mistake, others convinced he had outsmarted federal systems and gotten away with it. For him, the aftermath was quieter. He shut down every online profile he had ever created, deleted old code repositories, removed himself from forums where he once spent hours discussing orbital paths and atmospheric drift. The computer he built piece by piece went dark and stayed that way. He didn't write another line of code. In a small apartment in the Midwest, far from the noise of federal briefings and digital speculation, he tried to disappear, living under the weight of a story he never meant to be part of. But the ripple of a 0.47-second anomaly doesn't fade easily. Not for NASA, not for investigators, and not for him. But the story wasn't over. The final log surfaced weeks later. A single packet, small, corrupted at the edges, buried inside a batch of routine diagnostic data. No sender ID, no traceable route, Just one line of text, preserved only because an analyst flagged it before the system purged the file. Not him. No one at NASA could explain who wrote it, or why it existed at all. And in a network that tracked every byte across thousands of miles, its origin point remained empty, like a signature carved into fog. Inside the agency, whispers spread quietly through late-night offices. One engineer insisted it had to be an inside job. A controlled test slipped through without documentation.
A bypass.
Another senior analyst argued the opposite,
primary conduit.
that it was nothing more than a cosmic glitch, a rare collision of timing, drift, and system fatigue. Neither theory fit the data, because the last piece of evidence refused to settle. A geo-anomaly buried in the investigation logs showed a device fingerprint nearly identical to his. Same clock drift, same chipset pattern, but pinging from a city he had never been to. 600 kilometers away. Too far for coincidence. Too precise for comfort. It left investigators staring at a blank space on the map, wondering how a machine could copy another so perfectly, and why it chose that exact moment to appear. If he wasn't the one who touched NASA, then who did? Or maybe the truth disappeared with him.